The Captain's Gamble by Oliver Hale. The rope bit into Isabella Whitmore's wrists as she struggled against her bonds, salt spray stinging her face as the ship pitched violently through the storm. Thunder crashed overhead, and she could hear the crew shouting orders above the howling wind. 3 days ago, she had been the pampered daughter of a wealthy merchant, bound for the Caribbean to meet her betrothed. Now she was the prisoner of the most notorious pirate captain in these waters. Still trying to escape, I see. The voice was rich and amused, carrying the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. Captain Rafe Valencourt stepped into the cabin, water dripping from his dark hair and his white shirt clinging to his muscled chest. Despite her precarious situation, Isabella found herself noticing the way his green eyes seemed to pierce right through her. "A gentleman would have the decency to knock," she said, lifting her chin with as much dignity as she could muster while tied to a chair. Rafe's mouth curved into a smile that was equal parts dangerous and charming. "Ah, but I've never claimed to be a gentleman, Miss Whitmore. Pirates rarely are." He moved to his desk, pulling out a bottle of rum and 2 glasses. "Though I do try to be civilized with my guests." "Guests?" Isabella's voice rose an octave. "You kidnapped me from my father's ship." "Rescued you, more like. Captain Morrison was planning to sell you to the highest bidder in Tortuga." Rafe poured rum into both glasses, then approached her with one extended. "Your father's debts run deeper than you know." Isabella stared at him, her world tilting more than the storm-tossed ship. "That's impossible. My father is one of the wealthiest merchants in London." Was, Rafe corrected gently, until he made some very poor investments in sugar plantations that were destroyed by hurricanes. He owes considerable sums to some very dangerous men. He held the glass closer to her lips. "Drink. You've had nothing since yesterday." She turned her face away stubbornly. "I'd rather die of thirst than accept anything from a pirate." Such dramatics. But his tone was fond rather than mocking. He set the glass on the nearby table and moved behind her chair. Isabella tensed, expecting the worst, but he merely began working at the knots binding her wrists. "What are you doing?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "These ropes are too tight. You're losing circulation." His fingers brushed against her skin as he loosened the bonds, and she was mortified by the way her pulse quickened at the contact. "Why should you care?" But even as she asked the question, she flexed her fingers gratefully as feeling returned to them. Rafe came around to face her again, and she was struck by the sincerity in his expression. "Because contrary to what you may believe, I don't make war on innocence." "Then why am I here?" Isabella rubbed her wrists, studying his face. In the lamplight she could see a thin scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and she found herself wondering how he'd acquired it. "Because your betrothed, Lord Pemberton, hired Captain Morrison to deliver you to him by any means necessary, including forging documents that would give him control of your inheritance upon marriage." Rafe's expression hardened. "Morrison was planning to drug you during the journey to ensure your compliance." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "You're lying." "I wish I were." Rafe moved to his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are the documents we found in Morrison's cabin, along with a rather detailed letter from your intended husband outlining his plans." With shaking hands, Isabella took the papers and began to read. Her father's familiar handwriting blurred before her eyes as the truth became undeniable. Not only were the debts real, but her engagement to Lord Pemberton had been arranged as part of a business transaction to settle them. Worse, the marriage contract would indeed give Pemberton complete control over her mother's inheritance, the one thing that should have remained hers. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you help me? What do you gain from this?" Rafe was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cabin's windows at the storm. "Perhaps I simply don't care to see a woman forced into marriage against her will." "There's more to it than that." Isabella studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "You're not telling me everything." He turned back to her, and she saw something vulnerable flicker in his eyes, before his usual mask of confident charm slipped back into place. "You're very perceptive, Miss Whitmore." "Isabella," she said softly, "and you're avoiding the question." "Isabella?" He seemed to test the name on his tongue, and she felt an unexpected warmth at the way he said it. "Very well, Lord Pemberton killed my sister." The words hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Isabella set down the papers with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry." Elena was 18 when she caught his eye at a ball in London. He pursued her relentlessly, promising marriage if she would accommodate his desires. Rafe's voice had gone deadly quiet. When she found herself with child, he denied any involvement and had her thrown out of his house. She died in childbirth in a workhouse, alone and penniless. My God. Isabella pressed her hand to her mouth. How do you know all this? Because I was there. Rafe's smile was bitter. Rafe Valencourt may be a pirate captain, but he was once Lieutenant Rafe Valence of His Majesty's Navy. Alina was my younger sister, and I was powerless to help her, because I was at sea, fighting for king and country. The pieces began to fall into place. You turned to piracy for revenge. Initially, yes, but I discovered I had a talent for it, and it proved far more lucrative than naval service. He moved closer, and Isabella found herself caught by the intensity of his gaze. When I learned that Pemberton was acquiring another young bride through underhanded means, I couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself. So you're my knight in shining armor? Isabella asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy moment. Hardly. I'm a pirate, remember. My armor is distinctly tarnished. But his eyes crinkled with genuine amusement, though I suppose I could be convinced to play the role temporarily. The storm was beginning to abate, and Isabella could hear the crew moving about on deck with less urgency. What happens now? I can't go back to London. My father will simply arrange another marriage to settle his debts, and I can't exactly make my own way in the world as a proper lady. You could stay with us, Rafe said quietly. Isabella's breath caught. Stay with you? On a pirate ship. We're not the savage criminals you might imagine. My crew is made up of men who've been wronged by the system we once served. We have our own code of honor, and we take care of our own. He paused, studying her face. You could be free, Isabella. Truly free, perhaps for the first time in your life. And what would my role be in this arrangement? She asked, though her pulse was racing at the possibility he was offering. Whatever you choose, we have need of someone who can read and write well, someone who understands the intricacies of business and trade. Your education needn't go to waste. His voice grew softer, and perhaps in time something more. Something more? Isabella's voice was barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Rafe stepped closer and gently cupped her face in his hands. I know this is madness. I know I'm a fool to think a lady like you could ever care for a man like me. But these past 3 days, watching you face adversity with such courage and dignity, you've made me remember what it felt like to hope. Isabella's breath caught as she saw the vulnerability in his expression. This was not the confident pirate captain, but simply a man who had lost everything he'd once held dear and was afraid to risk his feelings again. You're not the man I thought you were, she said softly. Rafe's hands dropped away from her face, and he stepped back. No, I suppose I'm not the dashing romantic hero of your novels. No, Isabella agreed, then smiled. You're better. Before he could respond, she rose from her chair and closed the distance between them. Standing on her toes, she pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then grew bolder as he responded. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and she marveled at how perfectly she seemed to fit against his chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Isabella, Rafe said roughly, you don't know what you're doing. If you stay with me, there's no going back to your old life. You'll be the lover of a pirate captain, branded as a criminal yourself. Then I'll be a criminal, she said firmly. But I'll be a free one. The authorities will hunt us. We'll never be safe in any English port. Then we'll find other ports. Isabella placed her hands on his chest, feeling his rapid heartbeat beneath her palms. Rafe, I've spent my entire life being what others expected me to be. The dutiful daughter, the perfect lady, the obedient bride-to-be. For once, I want to choose my own path. Even if that path leads to danger and uncertainty. Especially then, she smiled up at him. Besides, I have it on good authority that you're quite capable of protecting what's yours. Mine? His eyes blazed with sudden intensity. Well, Isabella said with a coy smile that would have shocked her former acquaintances, that depends entirely on whether you're brave enough to claim me. Rafe's answer was to sweep her up in his arms and kiss her with a thoroughness that left no doubt about his intentions. When he finally set her down, she was dizzy and breathless. I should warn you, he said, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear, I'm a very possessive man. Good, Isabella replied, surprising herself with her boldness. I find I'm feeling rather possessive myself. 3 months later, Isabella stood on the deck of the Siren's Call, watching the sun set over the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean. Her simple cotton dress was a far cry from the elaborate gowns she'd once worn, but she'd never felt more beautiful. The sea air had given her skin a healthy glow, and freedom had put a light in her eyes that no amount of proper breeding had ever achieved. "Any regrets?" Rafe asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Isabella leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." "Ah, but then you wouldn't have appreciated the adventure." He nuzzled her neck, making her shiver with pleasure. "You needed to know what cage you were escaping from." Speaking of escaping, Isabella turned in his arms. "I received a very interesting letter today." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "It seems Lord Pemberton met with an unfortunate accident. He was found at the bottom of his estate's well, apparently having fallen in while drunk." Isabella's smile was perfectly innocent. "Of course, everyone knows he couldn't swim." "How tragic," Rafe said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing with mischief. "Indeed. And even more interesting, it appears he'd been spreading rumors about my disappearance, claiming I'd run off with a lover to avoid marrying him. Apparently he was quite convincing about my loose morals." "The scoundrel. Good thing he can't spread any more lies." "Quite. But the most fascinating part is that his death has voided all contracts associated with our engagement, including the one that would have given him control of my inheritance." Isabella's smile widened. "It seems I'm now a very wealthy woman." "Wealthy enough to buy your own ship?" Rafe asked hopefully. "Wealthy enough to buy a small fleet, if I so desired." Isabella stood on her toes to kiss him softly. "But I find I'm quite content with my current vessel and its captain." "Even though that captain is still technically a wanted man?" "Especially because of that. I've developed quite a taste for danger." Isabella traced the scar on his cheek with one finger. "Besides, I have plans for that wealth. Plans that might benefit a certain crew of reformed naval officers and wronged men." "Such as?" "Well, legitimate business ventures for one thing. Trading enterprises that would allow us to move freely in most ports without fear of arrest. And perhaps funding for other young women who find themselves in situations similar to mine." Rafe stared at her in amazement. "You want to turn us into respectable businessmen?" "Respectable is such a limiting word," Isabella said with a laugh. "I prefer entrepreneurial. We'll still be taking risks and seeking adventure, just with the law on our side for once." "And if I said I wasn't ready to give up the pirate's life entirely?" Isabella's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Then I suppose I'll have to learn to be a very good pirate indeed." "God help us all," Rafe muttered. But he was grinning as he said it. "You realize you're talking about completely changing everything." "Not everything," Isabella corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "Not the important things. Not the way you make me feel like I can conquer the world. Not the way you look at me like I'm the only woman who's ever existed. Not the way you've taught me that love isn't about possession or control, but about choosing each other every day." "I love you, Isabella Whitmore," Rafe said seriously. "More than I ever thought possible. You've given me back my faith in goodness and hope." "And I love you, Rafael Valencourt," she replied. "You've given me freedom and adventure and a life beyond my wildest dreams." As they kissed in the fading light, the crew of the Siren's Call went about their duties with knowing smiles. Their captain had found his match in the spirited former lady who'd adapted to life at sea with remarkable grace. She'd proven herself capable of everything from treating wounds to negotiating with port officials, and her quick wit had gotten them out of more than one dangerous situation. But more than that, she'd brought laughter back to their captain's eyes and reminded all of them that second chances were possible, even for men who'd lost their way. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isabella and Rafe stood together at the bow of their ship, planning their future with the same bold spirit that had brought them together. They would face whatever storms came their way, but they would face them together, two souls who'd found in each other the perfect blend of adventure and love. The sea stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities and new adventures, and they were ready to meet them all.